Thuathian Province, Vietnam, July 1970. 75 American soldiers died at Firebase Ripcord, but according to classified documents recovered in 1985, their radio transmissions continued for 43 days after the base was abandoned. From the depths of my collection, the War Maestro brings you a tale where the jungle doesn't just hide enemies, it harvests souls. Thuathian Province, Vietnam, July 1970. The dying days of America's failed crusade in Southeast Asia. Firebase Ripcord perched atop a razorback ridge in the Shau Valley, a strategic outpost where elements of the 101st Airborne Division found themselves surrounded by an invisible enemy. What began as Operation Chicago Peak evolved into a 23-day siege, one of the last major battles fought by American forces, costing 75 American lives and hundreds wounded. The battle officially ended on July 23rd with a hurried evacuation under enemy fire. But something remained behind when the helicopters departed, something that refused to acknowledge defeat. Sergeant Malcolm Mac Davis crouched behind sandbags as North Vietnamese artillery walked across the firebase perimeter. Each impact sent geysers of red earth into the heavy air, the concussion wave punching through his chest like a ghostly fist. Blood-warm rain dripped from bamboo leaves, indistinguishable from the sweat soaking his fatigues. 2 tours in this green hell had left him hollow, a walking ghost himself, moving through motions while something essential had been carved out of him months ago. Sarge! The voice barely registered over the ringing in his ears. A shell had landed close. Too close. PFC Eddie Kramer's face materialized through drifting cordite smoke, his eyes too wide, too knowing for a kid 3 months in country. Lieutenant's asking for you. Says it's urgent. Mac spat a glob of dust-thickened saliva and followed Kramer through the maze of bunkers. Men huddled in fighting positions, their faces mask-like with exhaustion and fear. Some prayed. Others stared with 1,000-yard gazes at nothing. The air tasted of gunpowder, rot, and something else, something metallic and ancient, like old blood on temple stones. Lieutenant Richard Ng waited in the command post bunker, radio handset clutched white-knuckled in one hand, map spread before him. Combat had aged the West Point graduate a decade in weeks. Veins of stress mapped his temples, pulsing with each distant explosion. Davis. Ng looked up, eyes hollow but intense. I need your fire team for a retrieval op. His finger jabbed at a point just beyond the firebase perimeter, where the jungle grew impossibly thick. Previous patrol went missing 48 hours ago. Battalion wants all sensitive materials recovered before extraction. What patrol? Whose unit? Mac demanded, feeling a cold finger trace his spine. Ning's gaze flicked to a communications officer who watched them with unnatural stillness. Orders direct from division. No specifics provided. Just recover all sensitive material. Document enemy activity. He lowered his voice to a whisper. 5-man team. Your selection. But Davis, there's something strange about this. The colonel's face when the orders came through. Through the bunker's narrow firing slit, Mac watched the sun bleeding into the jungle canopy. Darkness approached, and with it, the jungle's metamorphosis into something primordial and hungry. With respect, sir, extractions at 600 tomorrow. Why risk more men when we're abandoning this hellhole anyway? Ning leaned closer, voice barely audible. Because division claims no patrol was sent out there, Davis. Yet someone's been transmitting on our frequency from those coordinates. Transmissions that don't make sense. As Mac assembled his team, Eddie Kramer approached, clutching his ever-present journal. The boy's fingers trembled slightly as he opened it, revealing sketches of jungle and what appeared to be a firebase layout drawn with obsessive precision. Sarge, I need to be on this one. He flipped to a page showing a crude rendering of a pit surrounded by twisted trees, figures half submerged in darkness. Been drawing these 3 nights running. Don't know why. His voice dropped. In my dreams, I hear them calling us. They're waiting for us out there. Mac should have dismissed it as the ramblings of a kid cracking under pressure. Instead, a primitive recognition stirred in his gut. 23 days of siege had taught him instinct meant survival. Gear up, he said finally. We move in 30. As dusk conquered Firebase Ripcord, Mac couldn't shake the sensation of being watched, not just by enemy eyes, but by something patient and ancient in the jungle beyond. The artillery continued its deadly rhythm, but the usual symphony of jungle sounds had fallen unnaturally silent, as if every living creature was holding its breath, waiting. 5 men moved like ghosts through jungle so dense it seemed to breathe around them. Sergeant Davis led, followed by Eddie Kramer, Corporal Mike Hernandez, a stocky radio man with a nervous twitch, PFC Thomas, Doc Williams, and Private Frank Miller, a heavy weapons specialist whose hands hadn't stopped shaking since the siege began. Their world contracted to a 10-meter bubble of visibility. The canopy swallowed moonlight, leaving them navigating by instinct through a primordial darkness. Mac's starlight scope revealed only gradations of green against black, a world reduced to absence and presence. "Coordinates in 20 meters," Hernandez whispered, consulting his map. The jungle had fallen strangely quiet. No cicadas, no rustling undergrowth, just the squelch of boots on saturated earth and their own controlled breathing. Mac registered this unnatural silence with the sixth sense of a combat veteran. Nothing in Vietnam was ever this quiet unless death was stalking. "Hold," Mac hissed, raising his fist. The team froze. Before them lay a small clearing, unnaturally perfect in its circularity. Moonlight filtered through a break in the canopy, illuminating what awaited them, the remains of a patrol, 5 men in torn fatigues arranged in a loose semicircle. Their stillness was absolute, unnatural. "Jesus Christ," breathed Miller. Mac approached cautiously, M16 ready. The smell hit him first, not the expected reek of decay, but something else, a chemical overtone, like formaldehyde. "Wrong." "Doc," he called softly. Williams moved forward, medical kit ready. His hands hesitated above the nearest body, a sergeant stripped of identification. "Sarge, something's not right. They're preserved. No decomposition, no bloating." He rolled the body gently. "No apparent wounds either, but look at their eyes." The dead man's eyes were open, fixed in an eternal stare. Not clouded as they should be after days in this humidity, but clear and focused on something invisible above them. The same expression marked each face, an arrested moment of recognition or revelation. "Check for tags," Mac ordered, his voice tight. Eddie Kramer knelt beside one of the bodies, turning it. He recoiled. "This one's got something under him." It was an M7 bayonet, its blade darkened with dried blood. The dead soldier's fingers were curled around the handle, positioned as if he had stabbed himself. Yet, as Doc pointed out, his hands were clean, no blood spatter, no evidence he had actually committed the act. "July 15th patrol," Hernandez confirmed, reading from a recovered logbook. "Supposed to be monitoring NVA movements. Lieutenant James Herrick's team." "Herrick?" Mac frowned. "I knew him. He transferred out 2 months ago, back to Saigon." Eddie stood suddenly, his face drained of color. "Sarge," he whispered, pointing to a tree line 20 meters distant. "Someone's watching us." Mac raised his starlight scope, scanning the perimeter. Nothing registered except foliage and shadow. But then, movement. A silhouette moved with precise military bearing, observing them from the tree line. Not NVA, American. The figure raised its hand in a deliberate salute, then stepped backward, melting into jungle so solid it couldn't possibly conceal a man. "Secure these bodies for extraction," Mac ordered, his voice steadier than he felt. "Tag and bag. We bring them back." As they worked, Eddie scribbled frantically in his journal. Mac glimpsed the page, a perfect rendering of the clearing, the bodies, and standing behind them, figures in American uniforms with faces rendered as hollow voids. Night deepened around Firebase Ripcord. An hour after setting up perimeter, they heard it, the rhythmic crunch of combat boots on jungle floor. Radio static crackled from Hernandez's pack, though the unit was powered down. Through the white noise came a voice, speaking perfect, unaccented English. "Help me. We've been waiting for you." Every man recognized the voice. It belonged to Staff Sergeant Robert Hawk Hawkins, reported KIA 3 weeks earlier. His body never recovered. Dawn broke reluctantly over Firebase Ripcord as Mac's team returned, carrying body bags that felt inexplicably light, despite their contents. The firebase they approached seemed subtly altered, wrong in ways that prickled Mac's combat instincts. The main command tent stood 30 meters east of where it had been. A new perimeter of concertina wire gleamed where none had existed before. Men in the guard towers stood motionless, watching their approach with an intensity that raised hackles on Mac's neck. "Something's off," muttered Hernandez, adjusting the radio on his back. The sentry who challenged them at the perimeter wore a uniform too crisp for 3 weeks in the field. His eyes tracked their movements with mechanical precision, pupils contracting despite the dim light. "Password?" "Broken Arrow," Mac responded, using yesterday's authentication. The sentry's face remained impassive. "Proceed," he said after a pause that stretched seconds too long. Inside the firebase, personnel moved with the deliberate efficiency of sleepwalkers. No one made eye contact. No one questioned the body bags. Men Mac had known for months passed without recognition, their faces blank as mannequins. Luton waited at the command post, hunched over a map identical to the one from yesterday, yet the tactical markers showed positions from 3 days earlier. When he looked up, fatigue had carved new hollows beneath his eyes. "Report, Sergeant," Ing said, his voice strangely formal. "Sir, we located the missing patrol. 5 Kia, no visible wounds except one self-inflicted bayonet injury. Bodies preserved, despite environmental conditions." Ning's brow furrowed. "What missing patrol?" The question hit Mac like artillery concussion. "Lieutenant Herrick's team. The retrieval mission you ordered 12 hours ago." "No mission was authorized, Sergeant." Ning's gaze shifted to the communications officer, the same man from yesterday, still watching with that unnatural stillness. "No patrols have been deployed outside the wire for 72 hours, and Lieutenant Herrick was transferred to Saigon 2 months ago." "Sir, we have the bodies. 5 men in standard issue. The mission board shows your team never left the firebase, Davis. Your men aren't listed on any patrol roster." Cold reality distortion settled into Mac's bones. He'd experienced combat disorientation before, but this was different, a fundamental wrongness, like stepping through a mirror. He found Eddie Kramer sitting alone on ammunition crates, staring at nothing, journal clutched to his chest. The young soldier's eyes had changed, the same glassy, too-focused stare as the corpses they'd recovered. "Eddie," Mac prompted gently. "They're not dead," Eddie whispered, his voice distant. "They're just waiting." "Who's waiting, soldier?" "The men in the jungle." Eddie opened his journal. Pages that had contained precise drawings now showed obsessive repetitions of a single phrase. "The pit in the jungle. There's a place filled with corpses that talk when it rains. They've been there since the French, waiting for company. Eddie, you need Doc to check you out." "We saw ourselves out there, Sarge." Eddie's eyes suddenly focused with terrifying clarity. "Those bodies, they were us." Mac left Eddie with the medic and headed for the communications bunker. Something was wrong with their memories, their perception. There had to be records, proof of their mission. The communications bunker was empty, except for rows of reel-to-reel tape recorders, meticulously labeled by date. Mac found the logs from the previous night and threaded the tape with trembling fingers. Static hissed through the speakers, then cleared to reveal a voice, his own voice, transmitting from a position that never existed. "Firebase Ripcord, this is Retrieval Actual. We've located the missing patrol. Something's wrong. They appear undamaged, but, Christ, they're looking at us. They're all looking at the same thing. Request immediate extraction. They aren't dead, they're just waiting." The timestamp showed the transmission had occurred at 300 hours, exactly when Mac and his team had been standing in that clearing, saying nothing at all into any radio. Sleep came in fragments for Mac, shattered by artillery that no one else seemed to hear. Each time his eyes closed, he saw those 5 bodies staring skyward, their expressions frozen in the moment of understanding something terrible. When he finally woke, the morning brought no relief, only a suffocating wrongness that permeated everything. Mac found Hernandez at the mess tent, methodically spooning reconstituted eggs into his mouth. The radio man's eyes were bloodshot, fingers drumming an irregular pattern on the table. "You hear it too?" Hernandez whispered without looking up. Channel 7, all night. Morse code repeating coordinates. Same location we found those bodies. Could be NVA trying to mess with our heads, Max suggested, not believing it himself. NVA don't tap out waiting for you in perfect English Morse. Hernandez abandoned any pretense of eating. Doc sedated Eddie. Kid tried to claw his own eyes out at 200 this morning. Kept screaming about faces in the trees watching him through the bunker walls. Mac's throat tightened. Where's Miller? Armory. Been cleaning his M60 for 3 hours straight. Hernandez leaned closer. Sarge, I checked the battalion logs. That patrol we found? According to records, they were reported MIA during a recon mission on July 15th. But here's the thing. The names don't match any personnel assigned to this firebase. Ever. Mac felt reality slip further, like quicksand beneath his boots. And the bodies? Gone. I checked the medical tent. Doc Williams says they were never there. A dull throbbing began behind Mac's eyes as he walked the firebase perimeter. Men passed him without acknowledgement, their movements synchronized like wind-up toys. The morning briefing occurred without him. He watched through the command tent flap as Lieutenant addressed a room of blank-faced soldiers, pointing to map positions that had been overrun days ago. The armory tent smelled of gun oil and metal. Miller sat cross-legged on a poncho liner, his M60 disassembled into perfectly arranged components. His fingers moved with mechanical precision, cleaning parts already gleaming. Miller, Mac called softly. The gunner didn't look up. They keep getting dirty no matter how much I clean them, he whispered, voice cracked from disuse. There's mud in the receiver, jungle mud, but I haven't left the wire. Mac knelt beside him. Miller, we need to figure out what's happening. Miller finally looked up, eyes feverish. I remember dying here, Sarge. 3 days ago. Taking a Chi-Com grenade to the chest right where the ammo dump is now. His hands never stopped moving, cleaning, reassembling. But that's crazy, right? Because I'm still here. Mac found Doc Williams beside Eddie's bunk in the medical tent. Eddie lay motionless, arms restrained, eyelids fluttering in troubled sleep. His journal sat open on the adjacent table, pages now filled with crude anatomical drawings of men split open from throat to groin, their insides replaced with jungle vegetation. The final page showed the firebase from an aerial perspective, encircled by shadowy figures closing in. He started this an hour ago, Doc said, pointing to a fresh drawing taking shape beneath Eddie's restrained hand, a perfect rendering of the medical tent, with eyeless figures standing behind each occupied bed. He's drawing with his eyes closed, Sarge. The afternoon brought an artillery barrage, shells hitting with clockwork precision every 23 minutes. Mac watched in growing horror as the same crater formed repeatedly outside the eastern perimeter. The same 3 sandbags torn apart, the same pattern of shrapnel impacts along the communications bunker, like watching a film loop, repeating without variation. No one died. No one was wounded. No one reacted. Mac found himself drawn to the ammo dump, a reinforced bunker, stacked with artillery shells and small arms ammunition. There, wedged between wooden crates, he discovered Eddie's journal, though Eddie remained restrained in the medical tent. This copy contained new entries, detailed maps of tunnel systems beneath the firebase, connecting to a central chamber labeled Collection Point. A final page contained a message in handwriting not Eddie's. They are adding us to the others. We are becoming the firebase. The firebase is us. When the next artillery barrage hit, Mac realized the horrible truth. The impact pattern perfectly matched the diagram of tunnels in the journal. The firebase wasn't being bombarded. It was being excavated. Twilight descended on Firebase Ripcord, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds that seemed to pulse like exposed flesh. Mac searched frantically for Eddie, only to find the medical tent empty, restraints hanging loose, IV drips feeding into stained mattresses. The air smelled of antiseptic and something underneath, wet earth and rot. The PA system crackled to life, announcing, extraction at 600 hours. All personnel prepare for immediate evacuation. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Ng, yet carried metallic undertones, as if spoken through damaged vocal cords. Mac found Hernandez crouched beside the radio bunker, eyes wild, fingers working his rosary beads. "I found Eddie's signal," Hernandez whispered, voice cracking. "Been triangulating it all afternoon. He's transmitting from those same coordinates in the jungle." "That's impossible." He was restrained in the medical tent. "Not anymore, Sarge. And that's not all." Hernandez held up a weathered clipboard. "I found the duty roster from July 15th. The patrol that went missing? Check the names." Mac scanned the list, blood running cold. Malcolm Davis, Eduardo Kramer, Michael Hernandez, Thomas Williams, Frank Miller. Their names, their service numbers, listed as the missing patrol from 5 days before they'd even received orders. "This can't be real," Mac muttered, but couldn't deny the evidence before him. "It gets worse." Hernandez unfolded a map, hands trembling so badly he could barely manage it. "I've been marking artillery impacts. They're creating a pattern, like they're digging something out. And the pattern." He choked on the words. "It's a perfect outline of Firebase Ripcord, but 30 meters east of our current position." As if on cue, another artillery barrage started. The same rhythm, the same impacts, the same 23-minute interval. Men throughout the firebase continued their duties without reaction, like automatons performing program tasks. They're building something, Mac realized, or rebuilding it. Through thickening darkness, they located Miller at the western perimeter, kneeling before the tree line. The big gunner's shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Miller," Mac called softly, approaching carefully. "We need to move. Something's happening here." Miller turned, face wet with tears that left clean trails through camouflage paint. "I found it, Sarge. Where I died." He gestured to a depression in the earth, barely visible in the fading light, a perfect outline of a human body. "And over there? That's where Doc Williams fell. And there? That's you, Sarge. All of us. Waiting." The ground beneath Miller erupted, tendrils of vegetation bursting upward like questing fingers. They coiled around his ankles with purposeful motion. Miller didn't scream, didn't fight as he sank inch by inch into soil that shouldn't have been soft enough to swallow a man. "It remembers us," Miller whispered, a terrible serenity claiming his features. "The jungle remembers everything that bleeds into it." Mac lunged forward, but Hernandez held him back with surprising strength. "Don't touch him," the radio man hissed. "It's already got him." Miller's descent halted with only his head and shoulders visible. His eyes found Mac's, suddenly clear and calm. "They're collecting us, Sarge. Like the French, like the ones before. For the center pit. Find Eddie. He knows the way out." Then he was gone, the earth settling as if nothing had disturbed it. Mac and Hernandez ran for the command bunker, desperate for Lieutenant Ning for orders for sanity. They found him standing before a tactical map, perfectly still, head cocked at an impossible angle. When he turned, his face remained in profile, eyes fixed on the eastern perimeter. "Lieutenant," Mac gasped. "Miller's gone. Something took him." "No one is missing, Sergeant," Ning replied, voice flat, emotionless. "All personnel accounted for. Extraction proceeds as ordered." "Sir, we need to." "I said all personnel accounted for." The lieutenant's voice distorted, multi-layered, as if multiple voices spoke in unison. His body finally completed its turn, revealing what should have been impossible. Half his face and torso were simply missing. Not wounded, not bloody, but absent, like a photograph partially erased. Through the void, Max saw jungle vegetation pulsing with the rhythm of a heart. "You never left, Davis," the thing that wasn't Ing anymore said. "None of you ever leave Ripcord. The firebase remembers." Mac backed away, weapon raised, though he knew bullets would mean nothing now. Through the command bunker's viewing slit, he saw Eddie Kramer standing at the edge of the jungle, journal clutched to his chest, beckoning with urgent desperation. "We need to get to the LZ," Mac told Hernandez, his voice steadier than he felt. "Extraction is our only chance." Behind them, the thing wearing half of Lieutenant Ing began to laugh, a sound like bamboo splintering under artillery fire. The firebase had become a waking nightmare of impossible geometries. Distances stretched and compressed between bunkers, Familiar paths twisted into spirals leading nowhere. Mac and Hernandez navigated by instinct alone, avoiding soldiers whose movements had become mechanical marionette jerks. Some stood frozen in mid-stride. Others repeated the same action, checking weapons, filling sandbags with metronomic precision. "The LZ is our only chance," Mac said, checking his watch. "Extraction choppers at 600. "Sarge," Hernandez's voice cracked. "Do you even know what time it is now?" Mac looked down. The hands on his watch spun backward, then forward, settling on 23:0 hours, then 23:0 again, after another full revolution, the same time repeating endlessly. "Keep moving," Mac ordered, swallowing panic. They found the ammo dump ransacked, crates emptied, shells missing. In their place lay Eddie's journal, open to a new page. The crude drawing showed the landing zone, a helicopter hovering above stick figures. Behind them, emerging from the tree line, elongated shadows with grasping hands. "He's warning us," Hernandez whispered. They pressed on toward the firebase's eastern edge, where the primary LZ waited. The night had grown unnaturally still. No artillery, no distant gunfire, not even insect sounds from the jungle. Only their labored breathing and boots squelching through mud that felt increasingly like congealed blood. Doc Williams appeared suddenly from behind a supply tent, his medic bag clutched to his chest. "Doc," Mac called, relieved to find another team member alive. Williams turned, revealing a face transformed by terror. "I know what's happening," he said, words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "It's not just us. It's been happening since the French. The land. It collects. Absorbs." He opened his medical bag, pulling out not supplies but human teeth, hundreds of them, some decades old judging by their yellowed state, others gleaming white and fresh. Found these buried under the medical tent, dog tags too dating back to '65, and French insignia from the '50s. "We need to get to the LZ," Mac insisted, refusing to look too long at Williams' macabre collection. "No," Williams shook his head violently. "That's what it wants. Every 23 days it takes another group, feeds the center pit, the jungle. It's building something from us, using our memories, our bodies." A sudden flash illuminated the night, a flare bursting overhead, casting everything in harsh white light and knife-edge shadows. In that moment, Mac saw what Williams meant. The firebase wasn't just changing, it was transforming. Tendrils of vegetation had infiltrated bunkers, coiling through gun ports. The command post pulsed like a grotesque heart, its sandbag walls rippling with internal movement. And the men, Mac choked back bile as he saw what was happening to the firebase personnel. Some had become hybrid things, their uniforms splitting to reveal not flesh but fibrous green tissue beneath. Others moved in perfect unison, like cells in a single organism. The flare died, plunging them back into darkness. "Eddie's at the edge of the jungle," Mac said, forcing his voice steady. He was trying to show us something. They made their way toward the eastern perimeter, where the primary landing zone had been cleared. There, standing at the edge of trampled grass, was Eddie Kramer. His face was gaunt, eyes feverishly bright, but undeniably himself. "You came," Eddie smiled, relief washing over his features. "We don't have much time." "Eddie, what happened to you? What is this place?" "Not a place, Sarge. A process." Eddie opened his journal, revealing pages of meticulous notes interspersed with drawings. "The jungle remembers everything. French, Vietnamese, NVA, Americans. It's been collecting us, using us to rebuild itself." The distant thump of helicopter rotors cut through the night, the extraction choppers approaching right on schedule. "We need to go," Mac urged, pulling Eddie toward the LZ. Eddie resisted. "Don't you understand? It's not just about leaving. The firebase isn't on any maps anymore. It was abandoned 2 days ago." "What are you saying?" "Firebase Ripcord was evacuated July 23rd. Today is July 25th. Eddie's eyes bored into Mac's. "We're not in Firebase Ripcord anymore. We're in what it's becoming." The helicopter appeared above the tree line, searchlight sweeping the LZ. Mac waved frantically, relief flooding through him. The Huey descended, its doors open, revealing a crew chief who stared at them with undisguised shock. The pilot's voice crackled over their radio. "This LZ is cold. Firebase Ripcord was abandoned 2 days ago. We're not supposed to be here." As the words registered, Eddie clutched Mac's arm with desperate strength. "Don't let them leave without us, Sarge. It's our last chance." Behind them, the firebase began to change again, structures twisting, men emerging from bunkers with synchronized purpose, all moving toward the landing zone with the terrible patience of the jungle itself. "Run!" Mac shouted, shoving Eddie and Hernandez toward the hovering Huey. Behind them, the firebase personnel advanced with the inexorable patience of vines growing through concrete, slow but unstoppable. Their movements synchronized into a single flowing mass, no longer individual soldiers but components of something larger. The helicopter pilot's eyes widened as he spotted the advancing figures. The Huey dipped dangerously, rotors kicking up swirls of debris as the crew chief extended his hand toward the fleeing men. 3 minutes, the pilot's voice crackled over the radio. "Then we're gone." Eddie reached the chopper first, scrambling aboard with Hernandez close behind. Mac provided covering fire, though his bullets seemed to pass through the advancing figures without effect. As he turned to make the final sprint, something caught his ankle, a tendril of vegetation erupting from soil that shouldn't have been soft enough to permit its passage. "Sarge!" Eddie screamed from the helicopter, lunging to reach him. Doc Williams appeared suddenly beside Mac, severing the tendril with a surgical precision that spoke of practiced familiarity. "Go!" Williams shouted. "I'll hold them." The medic turned to face the advancing horde, his bag of collected teeth spilling onto the ground. Each tooth began to move with purpose, forming a perimeter around Williams as if responding to his will. Mac didn't wait to see more. He sprinted the final distance and leapt into the helicopter just as it began to rise. The Huey banked sharply eastward, leaving Firebase Ripcord behind, the command bunkers, the artillery positions, and the advancing figures that had once been men all receding into darkness. "What the hell was that?" the crew chief demanded, his face pale in the red glow of the cabin lights. "That firebase was evacuated 2 days ago. We flew the last men out ourselves." Eddie clutched his journal, knuckles white. "It's still evacuating," he whispered. "It will always be evacuating." The helicopter carried them to safety, to debriefings that led nowhere, to psychiatric evaluations, and eventually to separation from service under murky circumstances. The official record listed their patrol as reassigned prior to firebase closure, their experiences unrecorded in any official capacity. 15 years later, in a wood-paneled office at the Veterans Affairs Building in Chicago, Malcolm Davis sat before a video camera. His hair had grayed at the temples, and lines of hard experience mapped his face, but his eyes remained sharp, assessing. "This interview is classified under psychological evaluation protocols," said the interviewer, a civilian contractor with government clearance. "Please state your name and former rank for the record." "Malcolm Davis, Sergeant, United States Army, 2nd Battalion, 506th Infantry Regiment, 101st Airborne Division." "And you served at Firebase Ripcord in 1970? "That's correct. You claim to have been part of a patrol that discovered unusual circumstances during the evacuation of Firebase Ripcord. Could you elaborate?" Mac's expression remained neutral. "My official statement is in the record. My team was reassigned prior to the evacuation. Any other memories are the result of combat stress and environmental factors. That's what the Army psychiatrists concluded anyway." The interviewer leaned forward. "Mr. Davis, this interview is completely confidential. Several other Firebase Ripcord veterans have reported similar experiences: strange transmissions, missing time, men who weren't there appearing in unit photographs." He slid a folder across the desk. "There are anomalies in the official record that suggest—" "Are we done here?" Mac interrupted, suddenly tense. "Just one more thing." The interviewer extracted a photograph from his folder. "This was taken during the evacuation. We've identified most of the personnel, but this figure here," he pointed to a blurry silhouette at the edge of the frame. "Records indicate this man was reported KIA 3 weeks earlier." Mac's fingers trembled slightly as he touched the photograph. Photographs can be misleading. And this? The interviewer produced a small tape recorder, recovered from the communications bunker after evacuation. Listen. He pressed play. Through the static came a voice, Mac's voice. They aren't dead. They're just waiting. The camera continued recording as Mac gathered his coat, refusing further questions. It captured his departing figure, the straight military bearing that hadn't left him despite 15 civilian years. It also captured, for just a moment, what the interviewer would later report as a trick of the light, the momentary impression that Mac's shadow fell at an impossible angle, stretching toward the east, toward Vietnam. At home, Mac poured himself a drink with shaking hands. 15 years of running, of trying to forget. 15 years of waking at precisely 23-minute intervals throughout the night. Of vegetation growing too quickly in his garden, twisting into patterns that shouldn't occur in nature. On his bookshelf sat Eddie Kramer's journal, recovered from the helicopter that night, its pages now filled with meticulous drawings of Firebase Ripcord reconstructed in perfect detail. New pages appeared regularly, though Mac never wrote in it. The latest drawing showed Mac himself, seated before an interviewer, while behind him stood the ghostly outlines of his former team. Mac opened the journal to the newest page, added just this morning while he was at the VA. It showed his face, rendered with Eddie's unmistakable precision, but with one terrible difference: the eyes were rotting, revealing beneath them not the expected anatomy but twisted vegetation, growing inward rather than out. The last page contained a single line of text, not in Eddie's handwriting but in a script Mac recognized from those final transmissions from Firebase Ripcord. The Firebase remembers. The Firebase collects. The Firebase is still waiting for you to come home. According to declassified military documents, several patrol teams were never accounted for during the siege of Firebase Ripcord. Their records end abruptly on July 17, 1970. No further search and rescue missions were launched. Between 1973 and 1985, 17 Firebase Ripcord veterans reported identical nightmares of a firebase that continues operating long after evacuation, manned by personnel who were confirmed casualties of the siege. If the ghosts of Firebase Ripcord still echo in your mind, that's them calling you to join our ranks. Make sure your dog tags are still cold to the touch, then subscribe to access more classified files from the War Maestro's archive. Activate the notification bell. You'll want immediate clearance when our next military horror file is declassified. Share this transmission with fellow horror enthusiasts who understand that the most haunting stories are born in the fog of war. Leave a comment below. Have you ever served at a location that felt wrong? Or perhaps you've heard whispers of similar incidents from veterans who've seen the unexplainable. Remember, some firebase perimeters are still being patrolled, decades after the last chopper left.